It's a pleasure to see you again.
Good to see you again as well.
And of course, thanks for all of our viewers for tuning in another time to You, Me, and IP.
That's correct. Today's episode will be on Whose File Is It Anyway? A discussion on the intellectual property issues surrounding music and 3D printing.
And as fitting, of course, we do have the world-renowned digital rights, music, and management sharing expert, Dr. Tushar Bulsara.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure to be on the show with world-renowned expert in additive manufacturing and 3D printing, Dr. Lowe-Skillern.
Well, now before we get a little bit too into detail with the details of music and 3D printing, I think we ought to just talk a little bit about intellectual property as a whole.
So, intellectual property as a whole has different entities which govern different bodies of emerging technologies and intellectual property. What do we have here?
Well, we really got three different spheres you can be in. You can apply for a patent on maybe like a physical object, you can have copyrights on anything like designs, or you could even have a trademark. So I think what this really addresses here, though, is the core issue that intellectual property is about protecting your ideas. And it's about giving you an incentive to innovate and put time into that innovation because you know people aren't going to steal them later. But in a lot of spheres it can be kind of inhibited because you want to collaborate.
That's true, and I'm going to mention today a little bit about how these have been inhibited for the music industry. Essentially, there have been 4 different ways, and I'll briefly just describe how intellectual property management has been somewhat restrictive to the music industry. And those have been ways of digital media. The copyright laws have different parameters for sound recordings and for musical compositions. And sound recordings have really taken the hit in the past few decades in the sense that they are easy to create, yet very hard to manage. So the distribution of digital media has also been another huge aspect that has been limited from a policy perspective. For example, businesses have come out with new innovative ways to sort of go about distributing digital media and stay safe from copyright infringement and from excessive royalty rates. And so how does this affect the users? Well, the users love sharing music, and intellectual property rights surrounding digital media have been very restrictive in the way that users can share their music nowadays. And this has been a huge problem for the majority of users and the way that they interact with music. So, lastly, royalties in the music industry have been largely hit, and there have been propositions such as the Internet Radio Fairness Act 2012 proposed by Senator Wyden, which was aimed to sort of increase the creativity in the music industry by lowering royalty rates that Internet radio faces. These, however, have not always been the best case scenarios, and more and better policies are required to handle these issues in the music industry. So, we'll take a minute to also discuss how these sort of issues can transcribe into different technologies.
Well, yes, definitely as it applies to the field of additive manufacturing, there are a whole host of opportunities for intellectual property infringement, starting with even just the design of the printer itself. You don't want to be Stratasys, infringing upon 3D Systems printer design. With the structure of the printer or even with the process of the printing. Maybe you have a fusion deposition modeler which is extruding layers of melted plastic directed by the nozzle, which is taking directions from the 3D CAD design file. But also you might have a stereolithography printer which is taking a vat of photocurable resin and actually solidifying each layer with an ultraviolet light beam. So you want to make sure that you have patents on your processes, but also on the materials. Because if you have a new type of thermoplastic and you don't want anyone else to copy that, it's up to you to get that copyrighted or patented. But I think most importantly here are the objects that you're building. This is really what brings this discussion in with music, is that you have files that contain the digital instructions for your idea, for your property. And as you see sites in 3D printing like Shapeways or Thingiverse popping up on the internet, and you can now have a platform to share, distribute, and download other people's designs just to print them at home, we see a whole new issue of problems popping up and wondering if our laws can really keep up with changing technology.
Great question. So, That is the scope of public policy and technology today, and how can our rules keep up with the tools.
That's exactly right. Tune in next week for a little bit of a more in-depth discussion on how we can innovate around this law on intellectual property.
Thank you very much for staying tuned. Thank you again.